Lord. I don't know if you've pressed record or not. Meanwhile, talking to myself quite happily. Somebody's out there. Right. Did you press record?
Done.
Excellent. Just forget everything from the previous. We're starting now. Welcome to Perceptions Today. It's UK date, January the 11th, 2022. And today our esteemed guest is Anthony Peake for a live meet and greet. It's 3 p.m. and we're going until 5 p.m. having a good old conversation about everything from books and consciousness to other topics which we will find. Please remember that Twitter Spaces records these events for 30 days. We're also recording independently for the Perceptions Today podcast and Anthony Peake's YouTube channel, which you can find when you go to YouTube, all one word, Anthony Peake with the number 1 on the end. Remember, only talk about what you feel is comfortable being recorded. Perceptions Today's actually just deals with consciousness research in all areas along with kind pain management. I'm your host, Paul. Our co-host can't be here, unfortunately, today due to circumstances, and it's normally centered awareness in these Twitter spaces. What we do is we have live events and we do them in Twitter Space and also Zoom and other places. Some of the events that are coming up are the 13th of January is Eileen Myers talking about Kundalini and life. Then on the 18th, we have Myra and Dale talking about Guided by Intuition, which is a round table on Zoom, which needs to be registered for. Then on the 19th, we have the Cosmic Librarian talking about time and time slips and how it's affected her life. Again, that's a Zoom one and needs to be registered for. 25th, we have Mike Ferrito, who is an author, an experiencer, and also happens to be in the room. And again, that's a Zoom one. You will have to register for that. Then on February the 8th, we have Krista DeMaio talking about lucid dreaming, which is a Twist Space event. Then on the 1st of March, we have RN Voot, who happens to be here as well with us, talking about spirit in the sky, DMT, also brain structures and mythology. And of course, we will have other people filling in the other dates around. What we have is some guidelines, which we tend to do. And the best way to say it is we will start off with the agenda. The agenda that we actually have here is, as I've said before, please remember that only talk about what you feel comfortable being recorded, as it's going to be used elsewhere. Followed at a date, my teeth need to be put back in. Right, follow the Perceptions Today account. Sometimes we have Twitter space crashes, and if it happens, we can send out another link again, and you can find it from there. When there is announcements to be made, I may mute people or just butt in over people to tell them whether things are happening with audio or information about who are good researchers in the room, and also connection points that will make more sense to the actual conversation because we're just using icons at this present time. If there's a lot of people talking, we will go for one question per person, keeping it brief, but when you actually start talking, you can introduce yourself, say for like 30 seconds, then bring in your subject that you want to talk about. Also, if you can use hashtags as well when you're tweeting about this or tweeting to Anthony Peake, just so he knows where things are coming from, use the hashtag Perceptions Today Community, all one word, or hashtags Cheating the Ferryman, all one word. And we can go from there. What we like to do in this room, and you can see within the Twitter Space guidelines, is we like to be civil to everyone, keep on topic. And the best way to use Twitter Space is to use either a smartphone or a tablet with the app, and it's best used with headphones to have the best audio quality. And what we go through is any problems that you find, please DM myself, and then we'll try and fix those if we're going along. If you've never actually been in the environment before, there is a heart symbol and a set of icons. When you press these icons, you get these ones, another set being shown to you. The way that we use them is, the peace symbol is I cannot talk at present, hands up is I want to talk, fist is agree, 100% is strongly agree, and then laughing face is when everything goes and the wheels come off the bus like we have most of the times. If you just want to wave to people, you can. And also, this is the way that it goes with the conversation that we have mostly. What you also find is, going from there, we can now get on to the best part of the actual conversations. So, Anthony's books have been dealing with borderline consciousness, and he also backs up his research with scientific notes. And I think Anthony's just playing with a comb and making sounds at the moment. Is that you?
It was, but it's now all working.
You see, that's where you need the laughing face and everything else that goes on. And he has a very good sense of humor for when we're doing podcasts. He's published 11 books with his 12th one on the way, which will be published in America in June. His publishing house has published over 110,000 books in international languages, the major ones. And also he's been on numerous podcasts and also numerous times on different stages around the world. Please welcome Anthony Peake.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second session of our wonderful adventure with perceptions today. If the session is as good this afternoon as it was this morning, we're going to have a really exciting chat and some interesting discussions on some fascinating subjects.
Yes, I'd also like to say that we happen to have Krista DeMaio in, who is going to be one of the guests, as I said, about lucid dreaming. Also, if you want to put your hands up or request to speak, please do so. And I shall watch what will happen. Does anybody have a question to start it off, or shall I just pick on one person called RN Voot, who's probably still looking for his headphones?
He still is looking for his headphones. Bear with me.
Now's the time to ask the question. Go on.
Do you know, don't you find it extraordinary that here we are trying to understand the mysteries of the universe and everything else, and we can't find our headphones, and we can't make even these basic things work? So it's obviously the way life is.
What I would like to throw at you to start off the game, obviously the Wild Eyes had one of the best questions so far, is does telekinesis make really good tea, and if you can boil it correctly in water? But you had a really good guest on your YouTube channel on Sunday, which I think you should just give a brief overview on, because his topics were fantastic when I was catching hold of that.
Yeah, it is neuroscientist Professor Bob Davis. And Bob and I've known Bob now for around about 7 or 8 years. And he contacted me because he was involved in an organization called FREE that was set up by Edgar Mitchell, the guy that set off Ions all those years ago. Was he the 6th or 7th man to walk on the moon, I think? And Bob is a fascinating guy. Again, he has a very similar worldview to myself, that extraordinary claims need extraordinary proofs. And people like myself and Bob are going out of our way to try and do the science of extraordinary human experiences. Bob is particularly interested in consciousness, the role of consciousness, and also the mysteries of UFO encounters. You know, what is really taking place in the UFO world. You know, are they aliens? Are they aspects of ourselves, or they're a mixture of the two? And it was just a fascinating discussion. If anybody wants to check it out, it's already uploaded onto my YouTube account. And check it out, have a listen to it. The plan is that Sarah, myself and my assistant Sarah, we've agreed that we'll have Bob back soon on our Incon podcast, which will be 2 hours as well.
Could I just ask you, are you rocking backwards and forwards in your chair? Because there's something squeaking every time you talk.
It's probably me rocking backwards and forwards in my chair, so I'll try and stop doing that.
No, it's just fine, as long as we know you're not going to fall out of it, or you're not just playing with a comb and just stroking the teeth on it, as it sounds like from this end.
Oh, really? No, I'm not. This is a notoriously squeaky chair, unfortunately. But I'll try not to move too excitedly when I start answering questions. I tend to get animated, which means that the squeaking gets louder.
I will try to make sure that we keep it all going together. So what we're having here is Mike is having some issues with delayed sound, but he's getting back into that, which is okay. Obviously, got our vote looking for his headphones. I love people who are prepared. It's great. And Marandal is trying to get into Twitter space as well, which is great. So when we're going through with these questions, the best thing I think we were talking about this morning is going from the pineal gland and giving that as the connection point for let's say, some of the times of access to not kind of religious experiences, but we go on the spiritual one, and I think that would be a good topic to start from.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole thing about the pineal gland is extraordinary. And people, again, tend to get a bit carried away with it, but you don't need to get too carried away with the mystery of the pineal gland to find it quite extraordinary. For example, the reason why the ancients, and indeed people up until the early modern period, were fascinated by the pineal gland was for one simple reason: that if you break open the skull of somebody who died and then took the sides, the hemispheres of the brain apart, you'd find that there were two of everything. You know, the two amygdala, there's two hippocampi, but there's only one pineal gland, which sits dead center in the brain. And of course, there was a belief then that this was the seat of the soul. And people like René Descartes argued that that was the case as well. But as time has progressed, we've discovered some extraordinary things about this very, very curious little organ. In that, for instance, the highest amount of blood flow in the body after the liver is the pineal gland. And when you think that the pineal gland is what sort of the tip of your thumb in terms of size, it seems extraordinary that something so small needs such an amount of blood flow. Now, one of the things
Just going to pause you. I've had a very good question from the audience, and it's whether you're wearing a zip and your headphone microphone is rolling backwards and forwards on your zip or not that's making the sound.
It could be that. It could be that, yes. So I'll try and... Is that sounding better? Is that sounding better now? Okay,
the guy who did this happened to be, and you're very smart for working this one out, is Numero Low Joe. God, my teeth are not in for this one. Very good of you to work that one out. And also, when you're talking about, obviously, the gland, Orin Voot and the seahorse and Pegasus also connects into that. Will be good once you both have that conversation.
Okay. But just to continue a little bit about the mystery of the pineal gland, and I may have mentioned it on an earlier program, but if I haven't, or an earlier discussion we've had, but if I haven't, bear with me on this because it's quite important to be aware of this. And it's this: on the 29th day of gestation, the embryo in the womb, the pineal gland and the pituitary gland sit at the back of the throat in a singular unit called the epiphysis. After the 29th day of gestation, which interestingly enough is also the period that the Buddhists believe that the soul enters the body, the pineal gland and the pituitary gland move from the back of the throat to the center of the brain. And it does this progressively as the embryo develops. So it is that this little epiphysis moves up to the center of the brain. Now, in doing so, it leaves what's called Rathke's pouch, which is a kind of a cleft or a drain, if you want, for a better term, that leads from the center of the brain to the back of the throat. Now, there is a well-known technique that sadhus in India use called Kakara Mudra. And Kakara Mudra is when they train themselves to place the tongue at the back of the throat. And they do this for a reason, because they then feel that they can taste, when they go into deep meditative states, they taste something they call the nectar of transcendence. And this is a substance they taste which puts them into even higher states of conscious awareness. Now, this has been a long mystery as to what exactly the nature of this liquid is, this nectar, this ambrosia. But I've been doing some research in this, and indeed it is fascinating, because if you consider that the pineal gland effectively synthesizes endogenous, that is, internally generated dimethyltryptamine. I know dimethyltryptamine, as many of you will know, is the major constituent of ayahuasca, and it's one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, hallucinogenic substance known to man. Now, we know that DMT has been found in the human body. We know it's in the spinocerebral fluid. We know it's been found in various other areas of the body. But until comparatively recently, it's never been found in the brain. And there's a very good reason for this, that when it's generated, it evaporates very, very quickly. So the chances of ever discovering it inside a human brain, you'd have to kill the person very, very quickly and then open their brain up to see whether DMT is inside the pineal gland. But a researcher called Jimo Borgigin at the University of Michigan in 2017, together with a group of researchers, discovered in the pineal gland of live rats DMT. So when people turn around to you and say that DMT has never been discovered in the brain, that is incorrect. It has been discovered in brains. The question is whether it was there because it had come from somewhere else, or whether it had actually been synthesized by the rat's pineal gland. Now, this is where it gets intriguing, because the pineal gland exists to generate a substance called melatonin. And melatonin is the substance that makes you go to sleep. So the pineal gland sits directly above what's called the optic chiasma, which is where the optic nerve splits into two and crosses itself and goes to different parts of the brain into the area of the brain at the back of the brain, which processes sight. Now, the reason it's located there is very, very specific, because the pineal gland is light sensitive. That's why it's called the third eye. And it's called the third eye because it's light sensitive, and it's light sensitive for a very good reason. It needs to know whether there's light in the external environment, because when it starts to go dark, the pineal gland realizes it's going dark and starts to create this substance called melatonin. And melatonin is an enzyme that makes effectively you go to sleep. But melatonin is very, very similar in its chemical structure to dimethyltryptamine. So it wouldn't be such a difficult process for melatonin to be synthesized into endogenous DMT, or what an associate of mine calls metatonin. Now, this is then intriguing, because is this what people taste when they do Kakara Mudra? Is this what is taking place? Is this why for years people have tasted this acidic taste in the back of their throat? Now, it'd be interesting to know if there's any of the guys out there in the group who have experienced this, because normally when I talk about this, there's normally a number of people will turn around and say, yeah, I've had that taste. When I go into deep meditative states, there's this metallic taste that I feel. And I'd be interested to know, A, what anybody's opinions on that are, any thoughts on that, but more importantly, have you experienced anything similar yourself?
Just to throw in on that one, you also will find people who take different medicines will have that kind of metallic taste. And kind of like if you've lightly touched a battery to your tongue and got a small electric shock, that kind of thing that I've heard different people have said, and I've experienced myself with medications. Maybe if Aaron Voots actually got his headphones in, he might be able to mention as well.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We can indeed.
No, I've not experienced anything like that. But with regards to what you're touching on, with regards to the serotonin and melatonin, it's just something that kind of cross-pollinates my own research regarding the myth of Osiris. And as you obviously, from our discussions we've had before, I'm theorizing that Osiris himself, the etymology therein, OS being God and open, iris being eye. Osiris basically is a metaphoric allegory for the pineal. But what I find kind of extremely interesting with what you're talking about with regards to the serotonin and the melatonin being secreted by the pineal gland, I find it quite intriguing that we've gotten, I don't know how to even describe this at the moment without my bits and pieces in front of me. There's basically what I should basically describe as a 7-foot granite statue of Ramesses III, being blessed as the earthly embodiment of the spirit of Osiris. He's got anthropomorphic type deities, basically touching the side of Osiris's head, which is, again, like I hypothesized, the shape like the pineal. But throughout ancient Egyptian mythology, we actually have a tale that describes the battle of the kingdom of Egypt between Horus and Set. Horus's sworn enemy was responsible for the untimely death of his father Osiris. Now, in the story, the tale actually depicts a fight twice daily between the forces of light and darkness, whereby Seth destroys Horus at sunset and reigns over the Nile by night. Horus, however, avenges the loss to this nemesis at sunrise and banishes Set to the underworld until the setting sun once again. But again, if we look at this through a different or more scientific lens, we're kind of learning a significance of what actually might be transcribed via the pineal with regards to these other hormones that we're talking about being secreted by the pineal itself. realistically, Set could be looked upon as a natural contender for the neurotransmitter's chemical counterpart of serotonin, melatonin, which is actually, as you say, typically distributed to essential parts of the body by the way of the pineal during the night or once the sun has set. And Horus, when he avenges his father's death against Set, he could be likened to the serotonin, which obviously the pineal we know secretes in daylight hours only, if that makes any sense.
No, that does. And one of the things that I touched upon in one of my earlier books, again, is the actual layout of the temples I don't know which exact temples they are now, I can't recall, but it looks as if, the symbolism there, the pineal symbolism, is quite overt and quite clear. So it is evident to me that the mystery of the pineal gland goes right back into history. For instance, I mentioned this earlier this morning in the other discussion, but what intrigues me is the way in which there's one particular religious group in India called the Kashmiri Shaivists, and they not only venerate the pineal gland, but they also protect it. They also wear hats continually, and the reason they do this is to protect the pineal gland. So clearly there is more to this than just the fact that it is one of the few singular items in the brain. There is far more to this. But as we were discussing earlier, ancient civilizations seem to know a good deal, as much as we do, if not more, about physiology and the role of the brain and consciousness within the universe, really.
I think you're going to find
across all the religions as well. I mean, you look at just with regards to the shape and the appearance of the pineal and the pine cone therein. Look at the temples of Angkor Wat and the court of the pine cones in the Vatican. It's just there's too many religions and too many archaic traditions that are repeating the same kind of. It's like they're singing off the same hymn sheet, albeit different gods.
One of the things I did a few years ago was I did a broadcast from Angkor Wat, and I discussed there about the large pine cone that's actually found in the Vatican, and then behind me were the towers of Angkor Wat. And I said, but if we're talking about pineal envy here, this really outdoes the pine cone in the Vatican by quite a considerable amount.
Definitely. And also, Krista is going to come in on a question that she has, but you were also saying that at one stage you were standing in a pub opposite the Masons' main lodge in London, and then when you turned around, you found the columns were actually having the structure of pine cones there as well.
Oh, absolutely, yes. The pub is known as the Hercules Pillars, which is a Masonic pub that sits opposite the Masonic Hall in Covent Garden. And inside that pub, there is so much symbolism. And what is curious here is that I was drinking in that pub from the mid-1970s onwards and never noticed it. And it's in plain sight. They actually have two huge Hercules pillars in there. And of course, the Hercules pillars are literally the Ida and the Pingala, which are the avenues of Kundalini experience, and the Kundalini goes up the spine and goes up the two sides, and it's symbolic of the spinal cord. So it's very, very intriguing, this.
That fits in so well, because on the 13th we have, Thursday coming up, Eileen Meyer talking about Kundalini and how her life has been changed with it. Krista, good morning, good afternoon.
It's morning here. Hi, Paul. Hi, Anthony. Anthony, you had mentioned if anybody had an experience with that metallic taste in the back of their throat and meditation. And I actually heard you first on the Mysterious Universe podcast, and the hosts, Ben and Aaron, were talking about one of their personal friends who was a seasoned meditator, and I don't know what specific practice they were doing, but one of the singular experiences of that meditator was that he was in very, very, very deep meditation, and like an Arthurian knight in full armor came and shoved a sword through the back of his head, through his throat, and it broke him out of the meditation with that taste in his mouth. So since I know that you're connected with those guys, if you're curious about more of that story, just reach out to them, because I had never heard of that before. But you talking about it now kind of makes me wonder, if there's a connection there.
I think it's a very valid point. It's something. There are all these things that need to be pursued because there's some of the evidence is there. It's just a matter of looking for it. But once we don't get too carried away with the evidence and make false assumptions, but generally, it is a very interesting area here, and something that's quite exciting, I think. Thanks for that, Krista.
We do also have Myron Dahl listening in. He's having a little difficulty getting connected with the smartphone. I would also like to say that Avantgardis runs a very good Twitter space on all esoteric kind of subjects. He hasn't actually requested to speak, but I'll give him the option to have a conversation with yourself. But it's just fascinating how many people are looking at the consciousness angle and linking in with all these kind of environments like Twitter Spaces, Zoom, and they're all out there trying to search for the right kind of thing, which we're all really not trying to be the first, but just trying to interlink it to make more sense of it.
I totally agree. I mean, that is the skill, and that's why I think our little group, and I mentioned this on Sunday as well, and I think that we are joining some interesting dots. I think collectively we have individual pieces of a fascinating jigsaw puzzle, and one day, and Sarah and I, my assistant, we've discuss this, that one day we need to get everybody together at this huge conference. We get everybody together and create this huge egregore and just debate and discuss these ideas, because I'm sure that the pieces will fall into position. So it's very exciting times, and I think we are part of something that is extraordinarily exciting at the moment. And as long as we don't throw the baby out with the dishwater, with the bathwater, because it's very important that we start with science, we work with science, and we work with logic. And that, to me, is the most important thing, because we need to take this out to the general public, and we can't take it out to the general public if we're in a position whereby we are citing what could be nonsense, because we will be taken apart. The idea is that we need to do our science. We need to make sure that our facts are correct. We also need to be in a position that if information comes up that contradicts what we believe to be the case, we've got to be grown up enough to just accept it and move on, because ultimately this is what we are doing. We are dealing with facts, and we're trying to discover important facts about the true nature of consciousness. And if the facts contradict, we accept that and move on.
Well, that's the way this kind of community started off, is just coming together, trying to look at both sides of any story and seeing what goes on from there, and taking it from a factual point of view, but also trying to place it down at layman's terms, so that if you'd never actually come across a topic, you might actually feel that you might want to put your toes in the water and go further, or just run away and it's not the right time and you might come back a few weeks later, kind of thing. So it's been really great for the community that's been doing that. I mean, you got Plough Nation comes in, you got Dead Inside, you've obviously got Krista here, Wild Eyes, RN Voot, Mike, Frito, who's on a regular basis, and we got new faces down here like Numero Low Joe, which is making my tongue not work properly, and a few others. And again, if you want to ask questions, please just hit that request button and I will bring you up so that you can actually put forward one of your questions. Because I know good old RN Voot still hasn't got his headphones yet, I'm sure.
You know me too well.
So I wanted you to talk about the Pegasus angle, which the structure, or have you already done that? RN.
I think we covered that in the last conversation that we had with Anthony.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I was just saying that you were looking at the way that the mythology is actually relating back into brain structures. So we've kind of lost the wording within languages, and only now through mythology are those concepts being encoded, and we're now peeling them back like skin off of an onion at a time, aren't we?
Oh, no, indeed. I mean, I'll touch on the Pegasus myth very quickly, just as a quick analogy. Yeah, basically, as you know, the hippocampus is known for memory recall and higher brain functions, but hippocampus is actually an ancient Greek word meaning seahorse, for good reason too. The hippocampus, basically the structure of, looks like a seahorse. But with regards to the myth of Pegasus and how this comes back to the hippocampus, is that we find that Pegasus is a white flying horse whose father was Poseidon, who was the god of the sea, and believe it or not, horses. But Pegasus's wings, where do they come from? Well, you've got the in the brain, which what protects the brain. We have the cerebrum, and the cerebrum, according to, I mean, I can't see any other way these myths would or wouldn't make sense. They're
Okay, I think we just lost you there at that point. Maybe. Let's have a little bit of audio check again with yourself, Orion.
You there?
I can hear you. Can you hear us? Knock 3 times on your table if you can hear us.
I can hear you.
Okay, so you're cutting in and out. I would recommend yourself to bounce out the room, come back in again. Meanwhile, I'll let Wild Eyes continue with her question.
Hi. My question regarding the pineal gland and, let's say, psychic abilities. I understand that there is a connection there, but if that is there a possibility of it being blocked? And if so, does that have an effect on the psychic ability itself? And if so, is there a remedy?
Not the area I discuss, or I'm particularly qualified to discuss either, in terms of whether the pineal gland gives people psychic ability. I genuinely don't know. I would suspect it may do, but I know of no mechanism whereby that would happen, if that makes sense. And that's the thing that's important to me, is doing the science. And until I find evidence that these things can be discovered scientifically, I would prefer to keep it into the realms of what we know to be the case in terms of our scientific understanding. But clearly there is something uniquely interesting about the pineal gland, purely and simply because so many civilizations are intrigued by it. But it could simply be that it's because of what it looks like. Now, it is interesting to note that when the guys were researching DMT, I think it was Michael Harmer was one of the, was it going back even further? I think it was when they first discovered the chemical constituents of ayahuasca. And one of the substances, they actually called it telepathine, because they believe that when you take it, telepathic skills seem to take place, and it seems to make you more telepathic. And I'm wondering if what is happening here is that the pineal gland may in some way, and this is complete conjecture on my part, is I have a model of reality I call the daemonadalon dyad. And effectively the daemonadalon dyad is saying that we are, most of us, in our everyday linear personalities are what I call eidolons. These are people that live within the simulation, and we live life linearly, we live it within time, and we were born, we live, and then we die and we disappear again. That's an eidolon. But there is another part of us, which I call the daemon. And the daemon is what is the equivalent in mystical traditions of the higher self. But unlike other writers, I don't just do the higher self and just throw it out there without any science behind it. I do the science of arguing there is strong evidence to assume that there is another element of consciousness that exists within the human brain. And that seems to have greater knowledge than the everyday personality. Now, if you then move higher up, and my new book will be discussing this in greater detail, I'm suggesting that at the next level, there's something I call the Uberdaemon. And the Uberdaemon is the collective consciousness of humanity. This is again a link to the Jungian idea of the collective unconscious. And I believe that under certain circumstances, eidolonic consciousness can move into demonic consciousness and into the Uberdaemon consciousness, in which case it's able to attune into a much broader field of information than the ordinary brain can. In which case then we could argue that telepathy could be a possibility. Because what is happening is it's tuning into a different state of vibration, to coin a phrase. And again, using the latest science, I would argue it's tuning into probably the 0 point field. And if it is doing so, this means that we can probably communicate non-locally. And of course, we know from quantum physics that non-locality is a reality. And not only that, in one of my books, I have a section on something called a calcium wave, which is a form of communication that takes place within the brain that seems to be non-local, in the sense that the communication is immediate between one part of the brain and the other. And this again comes directly down to maybe how we've misunderstood the structure of the brain. Most people will tell you that, you hear this phrase, we only use 10% of our brains. What that actually is that, no, 20%, I should say. And what it actually is 20% of the brain consists of cells known as neurons. And they communicate electronically by something called synapses and through the projection of neurotransmitters. But there are other cells, the 80% of the brain that doesn't seem to work, we don't understand what it does, are called glial cells. Now, these glial cells, there, as I say, there's much more glial cells in the brain than there are neurons, but they don't know what they're there for. Now, the brain and the human body and nature itself is parsonymous. It doesn't just do things for no reason. There has to be a reason why glial cells are there. And I believe it's the glial cells that communicate non-locally. And this is where memory is found. It's not located. It's located all across the brain. So I think these are the areas we need to be looking into now in terms of brain structures. We're too interested in the neurons and not as interested enough in the role of the glial cells. And just a very interesting aside, the evidence of just how glial cells are dismissed is where the word glial comes from. It's German for glue. And they believe that all the glial cells were there was to hold the neurons in place. And that's clearly not the case.
Because you also think it's the holographic way that it transmits across the brain in that structure.
Correct. I mean, I believe that what is happening is, well, it's not what I believe. It's what other people have suggested over the years. A guy called David Bohm, Professor David Bohm, many, many years ago, argued that the universe itself works upon holographic principles, and that what we perceive is called the, what's the term he used now? The explicate order. And the explicit orders is effectively the reality we perceived. But underneath that is something called the implicate order. And that's what really generates everything. Now, on top of this, a guy called Carl Pribram, who was a student of a guy called Carl Lashley. And Lashley was the guy that spent most of his career trying to find the location of memories in the brain. And he used to work with rats. And he used to cut sections of a rat's brain out, teach it to do something like negotiate a maze, and cut bits of the brain out. Now, whatever bits of the brain he cut out, the rat was still able to negotiate the maze. So therefore, he concluded that memory is nowhere in the brain. Well, I think he's incorrect there, and I think memory is everywhere in the brain. Now, one of his students was a guy called Carl Pribram at Georgetown University. And Pribram argued that memory works holographically and the brain works holographically. And what I genuinely believe is happening here is that we have a hologram processing a hologram. In other words, the human brain works holographically and the greater universe is holographic. Now, one final point on this, which is a very important point about holograms, which you need to think about for a second. If you take a holographic image, if you take a normal picture, a photograph, and you cut it into tiny pieces, each of the pieces will be like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. They will have an element of the overall image. If you take a holographic image and you smash it, each piece of the image is an image of the whole image. It's just slightly degraded. So every piece of a hologram contains the whole, and every whole contains the parts. And this is what I believe how the universe works. It's far more interesting. So in which case, in a very real sense, the teardrop in your eye contains the Andromeda galaxy. And if you think about that for a second, it means everything is enfolded within itself. Again, what David Bohm argued. And I think this is what modern science is now discovering. This question of enfoldment, this in question of the holographic nature of reality. And a very final point, if you go onto my YouTube site, this morning I posted breaking news about recent discoveries that have been made in terms of the nature of black holes and information. This is exactly what I'm writing about in my new book. In fact, I've already written a book that features a lot of the elements that is only just breaking news in the scientific community literally over the last few weeks.
Did you mean on your Facebook page?
Yeah, what did I say? Did I say
YouTube?
No, Facebook page. On the Facebook
I'm watching you. I'm making sure you're correct and factual.
I know. God, you're there. You're hovering over me.
Right. I'd just like to say welcome to Paranormal Blip, who is a podcaster and also is one of the community and brings so much to the table. Can we hear you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got my mask on. I'm just about to get on the bus. And I'm going to tell them to take it to Las Vegas. No, I'm just about to get on the bus. I'm loving this. I've just had trouble joining, so I've literally just been listening for the last couple of minutes, but thank you. Hello, Anthony, and hello, everybody else. I'll go back on mute now, if that's okay. Thank you, Paul.
Hi there. Well, what's an interesting image? It'd be interesting to know which bus you're on and where you're going to.
It's just the south of Devon. It's not anything. It's beautiful down here, but it's quite everyday, really, to me.
You can never say the south of Devon is nothing. The south of Devon is absolutely gorgeous, one of the most beautiful parts of the UK.
I know. I'm very lucky to live here. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, unfortunately in December, he decided to start off his conversation going, I'm wearing a mask, I'm on a bus. And unfortunately, he'd shown us one of his photos of him in fancy dress as a cowboy. And I just had this vision of him taking over a stagecoach, and that was just too much now. So it always has a bad image now. I'll never see him in the same light again. So does anybody else like to come up with a question? Raise your hands if you do. Otherwise, I'll just pick on people because that's what I like to do. Excellent. Williams.
Okay, so I don't know if it's a question. I guess it would be. I'll just kind of say it and then we'll go from there. So I believe, with no evidence, obviously, that the universe is folding onto itself, meaning there's no outer edge. It loops in on itself, right? With that said, with that belief, I believe to find the edge of the universe, like so where it kind of starts to loop on itself, would it be quicker to zoom in on one spot? Because in theory, if you zoom in on one spot, the matter and everything changes, right? So I feel that if you zoom in far enough, you should be able to see yourself zooming in on that spot. It should overlap itself. Am I correct in thinking that, or?
No, I think you are. This is quite an interesting idea. The big debate is that either the universe is enclosed, it's an enclosed system. Now, if the universe is an enclosed system, there is some problems with that because it means there must be something outside of the enclosed system. But if the universe is in some way cyclical and some way curves into itself, then you will have, like you have with a circle, effectively a circle is infinity. You know, you go round in a circle forever. In which case the idea then is that particularly if you look far enough into space, you will eventually come back to looking at yourself. Because it's called Poincaré's recurrence, and the idea, it was come up by a French mathematician called Poincaré, and he argued that the universe is cyclical, and not only is it cyclical in in time and space. So yes, if you had a strong enough telescope that you could look into space, eventually you would see yourself looking at yourself. But the problem is we're talking about such extraordinarily long timescales here that clearly the light that would be coming from the other you looking at yourself would take an immensely ridiculous amount of time to get to your eye from the other you. But this does mean, and this is why Nietzsche came up with his concept of the eternal return and the eternal recurrence, because he argued that, you know, if time is cyclical and we live within an infinite universe, and time is infinite, it means that everything that can happen will happen an infinite number of times. And indeed that we will live our lives over and over again in exactly the same way as we've done before. And this is central to my cheating the ferryman hypothesis. I take a very different angle to it. But nevertheless, there is the argument that this is the case. And of course, the idea that the universe is in some way, if it is enclosed, if the universe is an enclosed system, We then have a really big problem. And this was the issue of the article that I posted on YouTube, on Facebook. And what it's basically saying is that information and energy can never be destroyed. It's as the second law of it's the first law of thermodynamics, isn't it? And the idea is that energy can never be destroyed. It can only be changed into another form of energy. Now, the question then is, if we are an enclosed universe and the edge of the universe has black holes around it, what happens if you throw your mobile phone into the black hole? Because the black hole will suck in all the information in that phone, and that information will be lost forever. And this is why Stephen Hawking came up with his argument of Hawking radiation. And get this, what they argue is, and this paper is very much proving this now, that what happens is the information contained in that phone and all the information that describes that phone as you throw it in will be smeared on the edge of the black hole. And everything that falls into a black hole is effectively copied on the edge of the black hole. Now, if the whole of the universe is surrounded by mini black holes, the edge of the universe, this means that everything that we are perceiving at the moment is actually being projected inwards from the outside edge of the universe. We exist in a two-dimensional hologram that's being projected from 3 dimensions from the edge of space-time. Now, this is extraordinary. Now, again, this is not science fiction. This is very much based upon the latest research in terms of black holes. Now, this means if this is a hologram, it means it is a simulation. It means that we are living within a simulation. Although the term simulation I don't like to use, I prefer to use the word instantation, which is a word that an associate of mine called Dr. Andrew Gallimore uses in his wonderful book on DMT and entities and everything else. It's a fascinating book if you get hold of it. Andrew has been a guest on my own podcast if you want to check it out, but very, very revolutionary new thinker. He's a Cambridge educated neurologist and he has some fantastic ideas. So the universe is far stranger than we can ever imagine. So your point there is an excellent one.
I did invite him in, Andrew Gallimore. And also it goes on to the kind of fractal way of thinking, the way that Williams is also looking at it. And when we've been recently looking at astronomy information, they're obviously seeing that there is heat escaping from black holes as well, which is something they didn't expect to be happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They didn't expect any form of radiation coming from a black hole. And this is the hypothetical Hawking radiation and the idea that things come back out of a black hole. Because, of course, a black hole is something that, and this is where it's so important to understand, a black hole is something, in order to escape the Earth, in other words, gravity, one of the theories of gravity, is that their sort of larger objects cause space-time to curve. So the larger the object, the more the space-time curves around it. So, for instance, the Earth curves space-time around it, and the Moon gets caught in the kind of the dip, for want of a better term, that the Earth causes. Now, in order to escape the gravitational pull of the Earth, something has to travel at 24,000 miles an hour. Okay, and in doing so, that's how a space rocket works. Greater than 24,000 miles an hour, it's the escape velocity, which means it can escape the gravitational pull of the Earth. The larger the object, the greater the gravitational pull. Now, a guy called Lemaitre, a Belgian priest, came up with the idea of thought, and he thought, well, is there any objects whose escape velocity could be much greater? And he hypothesized that there must be objects in the universe who are so dense and so, in terms of their density and their mass, that the escape velocity is greater than the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. If that is the case, even light could not escape from this object and would be pulled back in again. That is technically a black hole. And it means that it will suck absolutely everything into it. But when it does so, it destroys it to such an extent that it ceases to be anything. But we know that energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transferred into another form of energy. So where is all this energy going? And latest research is even more extraordinary. It's been discovered that information has energy. Information is a form of energy. Information has a degree of mass. So in which case, what we're really talking about when we're talking about the universe around us, what we're talking about is digital information, in the same way that digital information creates a three-dimensional image on your computer screen when you play a VR game.
Also, that goes into the document I was showing to you about pixelization of the universe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this pixelization is a fascinating idea. And the argument is that the pixels that make up the universe, it's quite interesting to describe how this, if you can just bear with me, I'll try and explain it to you. The Big Bang started, 13.7 billion years ago from, and I mention this in my book, from supposedly nothing. And nothing comes from nothing, but so there's a problem there. But nevertheless, imagine the scenario that it's expanding outwards. Now, it's like an inflating balloon. So imagine that the whole of the universe is like an inflating balloon moving outwards. And at every point within that space, more space is being created. But space is empty. So more emptiness is being created to add to emptiness. You see how it gets weird and ridiculous. But the idea is that the universe expands out. So now we are in in the middle of this huge inflated balloon. Now, look, if you can imagine, you're looking out from the inside of a balloon at the edges of the balloon. And that's the edge of the universe. Now, it has been calculated. There's an extraordinary calculation. What they've said is that the smallest bit of space you can have is something called a Planck square. There's something called the Planck length, which is the smallest length you can possibly have scientifically before everything breaks down. If you take a Planck length and you make a Planck square, that's the smallest bit of space you can have. They calculated how they did this, I don't know, but they've calculated how many bits of information, binary bits on and off, are needed in order to encode the information to describe this universe. They then calculated on the edge of the expanding universe, how many Planck squares would there be on the inside edge of the universe? It's exactly the same number. And they said that the coincidence of this is so extraordinary as to be inexplicable. It is only explicable if, in fact, we are inside a hologram.
I mean, that is fascinating. I'm coming to you, Williams, and what I was thinking of this, at some point we must discuss what we think the structure that actually holds consciousness is, in what kind of format, because obviously you can go from crystalline gases and everything else, but it's going to be a very good topic if we get people to go away and have one day say, right, we're going to come back and discuss this and see where we go from there. Williams?
Just to go off what he said there. So would it safe to say that maybe if we could be living in a membrane? So you have the mucus on the outside and we're the center of it.
That's extraordinary, Williams, because one of the sections of my new book, I have a whole section on membranes. And it's brain theory, BRANE. And this is the idea that this universe has been created by the interface. The Big Bang took place because it's the edge of two expanding universes hitting each other. And the universe is nested brains, nested membranes, and they each interface with each other. And when they get close to each other, they generate a phenomenal amount of heat. And it's that heat that creates Big Bangs. Now, this again is totally theoretical and it's really leading edge science, but it's very, very intriguing. So the idea is that the universe is far more interesting than ever we can imagine. And if ever you're interested, just pick up any leading edge book at the moment on cosmology. And as somebody said to me on my Facebook, YouTube, Facebook site, a friend of mine, and he turned around and he said, that at the moment, physics, particularly cosmology, cosmological physics, is nearer metaphysics than it is physics, as is the same with quantum physics. We're talking here about extraordinarily strange things that we're discovering about the true nature of reality. And indeed, for instance, over here in the UK, one of the most popular scientists who's on TV continually at the moment is a guy called Professor Brian Cox. And Brian Cox routinely dismisses people like ourselves who are inquiring into telepathy and out-of-the-body experiences and such like. And he calls us woo-woo idiots. And yet the title of one of his earlier books written with Professor Jeff Forshaw, a guy I know because I did an event with him at the National Theatre in London. The title of their book, the subtitle is Everything That Can Happen Will Happen. And this is extraordinary. These are top physicists, and they are saying quite categorically that anything that can happen will happen somewhere in the multiverse. So every single event and every single outcome of every single thing we do is already encoded in a huge program. Now, again, this is not me. Stephen Hawking, in his very last paper, wrote a paper with a guy called Thomas Hertog of CERN. And in this paper, they came up with what they call the top-down hypothesis of quantum physics. And this was quite precise. They argued that everything is programmed in, and every choice we make, we collapse the wave function, we collapse the reality to accommodate that decision. And each of us is doing that in our own lives, which means effectively at the moment, we as a group are collectively collapsing our wave functions to accommodate this discussion and to accommodate the phanerons or the worldviews of every other member of this group. And when we move away, we then move away into a different phaneron and we carry forward our particular world. So when, for instance, William Blake said to see heaven in a wild flower, he was genuinely meaning this. We all exist within our own version of reality, which overlaps with everybody else's versions of reality. And I call this the egregorial theory of reality. It's much more intriguing. It's much more interesting. It doesn't mean it's solipsism, but it does mean that our world is not what it seems. And in fact, my new book, these are all the areas I'll be going to in the new book.
That's excellent, because the way that you don't actually have to be the same body at some point because of all the different variations that are encoded of the whole universe. You could be part of the sun, etc., in whatever fraction of consciousness or what timeline you want to be kind of in it, like the ticking of a second hand on an analog watch, as we discussed before. There can be that kind of viewpoint. Myra, you've got a question or an answer or something to add to the conversation.
Good morning or afternoon on the rule place. I just came from work. I had meetings, so I just try to be brief. Like I mentioned in the morning, my approach was, my logic is that I expect that there were advanced civilization in the past, and if those civilization left some marvelous buildings, pyramids, and so on. So I expect that they also did some research in consciousness. So I mentioned in the morning, I read some scriptures, and the most that was influence, it is Upanishads. So how I see consciousness, it is kind of following Advaita Vedanta philosophy about consciousness. So I believe that consciousness is fundamental, and time and space arise from consciousness. So everything what can be observed is objects of consciousness. So even our mind, what we can observe our mind, so it is objects of consciousness. But there is some level of consciousness that is kind of between us and that I don't know how to mention it. Universal consciousness, I will call it. Absolute consciousness. So
I think what you mean, Myra, is if you imagine consciousness to be a balloon, that all of reality and material parts of that universe and everything else is inside the balloon, and consciousness is the outside of it all, meaning that consciousness is everything.
I don't see, I see your analogy, but I see that balloon is open. It's not closed. No, it is not enclosed. But
I apologize. I'm just trying to get an idea around in a very small concept.
That. I know what you mean. Only I would open that balloon. That balloon would be everything what is around. Even we don't. It is not physical. Consciousness is not physical. So that have I read from all scripture so far. I went across. I will not go to details what I read, because it will take too much time. But again, what I'm saying, I think that consciousness is fundamental, and everything arises from that.
Okay, can I come in there? Because I think it's a very important point here. Within Vedanta, there is a concept called Indira's web, and Indira's web suggests that there is a huge web, that the universe is a web where everything reflects in itself, and it's like I think Indira's web is like a huge spider's web, and at the nexus of each of the pieces of the web, there is a jewel, and each jewel reflects the rest of the web. And this again, as we say, the knowledge of earlier civilizations within the Upanishads and everything else is suggesting that this is very much the model by which we now understand the universe to work in terms of quantum physics and in terms of the holographic nature of reality. Now, in terms of consciousness, I'm very much of the opinion, and I present evidence for this, that we are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. Now, again, if you go into the Upanishads, you will have, and within the Hindu belief system, we have the concept of Brahman, and the concept that Brahman is dreaming everything, that we are emanations of a singular consciousness. But this is, in effect, what Aldous Huxley called a perennial philosophy. It's a philosophy that if you drill down into virtually every single religious belief system in the world, it comes down to the same thing. It's the idea that we are individuated consciousnesses that think we have an ego and think we have individuation. But in point of fact, we are part of a consciousness field, and we're like waves on an ocean. And when we move back from the existence we have in these meat machines, we just move back into this greater consciousness. Now, again, the ancient Greeks had a concept called amnesis. And the ancient Greeks believed that when you died, you were given the choice of drinking the waters of the river of forgetting, the river Lethe. And in which case, what would happen is you would go back and you would live your life again, either as a reincarnation or live your life again as you. But you wouldn't remember who you were. But there is a technique that people use called anamnesis, which is the loss of forgetting. And again, I don't know if the writer Gary Lachman is involved today. I know he was going to be looking in, but Gary has written an amazing biography of the life of Peter Ouspensky, the Russian philosopher. And this is central to Ouspensky's worldview. And Ouspensky, in fact, in the last few weeks of his life, because he knew he was dying, he spent all his time wandering around trying to evoke memories of his past life that he would remember, because he believed he was going back to live his life again as him. So the idea that consciousness is prime is of great importance. And again, it is being proven time and time again by modern quantum physics. There is a direct relationship between the act of observation and the act of measurement and subatomic particles coming into existence. Without an observer, subatomic particles are a statistical wave. It is only when they are observed or measured that they become a point particle. Now, these subatomic particles are what make up the physical world that we think is the physical world around us. But without an observer, they do not exist. And this is so profoundly important. And if you ever want to really embarrass a materialist reductionist physicist, just ask them about the observer problem. They will go quiet, they will mutter, they will do all kinds of things to avoid the fact that we know from the twin slit experiment that there's a direct relationship between observation and subatomic particles. Now, again, in my new book, I go into massive detail about this, and I'm citing really serious researchers such as Max Tegmark and various other individuals. This is so profoundly important. Sorry, Paul, you were going to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've got Williams and also Mike, who have obviously got questions which will fit in. Oh, by the way, I just have to say, welcome Imaginal Traveller, Eileen Meyer, who will be giving a live Twitter Space chat on the 13th, which should be UK Thursday. So go to the bio link here on the Twitter account and join us on Tuesday talking about Kundalini. So, Williams.
Can I just jump in and say hi, Noreen, as well, who's a very, probably of all the people who are involved in my writing, she's known me longer than anybody else We've known each
Excellent.
other since we were children. So hi, Noreen. Hi, Noreen. Love to see
Nice
you.
to meet you, Noreen. If you want to talk, just put the request button up. I will send you an invite and you can get yourself on the list here.
Okay, sorry again. Sorry for jumping in there.
No problem. I will jump in all over the place. Williams, you're next.
So it's just, I want to go back a little bit there about consciousness and how it can pass through that barrier. So now my thing is, what I start to believe is we live for the universe. Our consciousness is for the universe. Like, if people want to know that, that's what I come up with anyway. So with that said, when you pass on, your consciousness goes somewhere else. I believe it goes to another dimension, just from the conversations we're kind of having. So now the question is where are we coming from? So is the consciousness from the outer edge coming in? So that's another dimension is coming in, and that's what we're living now. So when we leave here, we go down a dimension, or are we going up a dimension? Right? That's my question. Which way are we going? Right?
Well, I think what we have to have our definitions clear as to what we mean here when we're talking about a dimension. Dimensions is a term that's bandied around in New Age circles quite happily. But what a dimension is effectively is a dimension of space and time. So what we're talking about is that there's the dimension of space and the dimension of time. Now, there is for instance, if you take a point, that's one dimension. And if you extend that out, you'll get a line, which is another dimension. And then if you draw up from the line into in a right angle, you get another dimension, which creates a square. Then if you then go in right angles from that, you end up with a square, a cube. So I'm making sense. You have a point becomes a line becomes a square then becomes a cube. And then the next level up is then a hypercube, is when you draw a line out from all of the corners of the tube to create what's called a hypercube, which was something that was central in the movie Interstellar, by the way, when you had Coop, the main character, looking at the life of his daughter.
You're going on about tesseracts, yeah?
And tesseracts, yeah, exactly. It's a tesseract. It's another term for a hypercube, isn't it? And the idea is it was called the tesseract sequence. Now, this means that you move into another dimension of space-time, and it means your perceptions change. But for me, what is of profound importance, and it's what drives me, is how does this happen? In other words, to turn around and say that we move into another dimension is just words, because we have no way of knowing within our knowledge of science, we have no way of knowing of how consciousness, which needs a brain to become about, can exist without a brain processing it. And this is profoundly important. There is nothing in science and our understanding of modern science, and this is the science that is creating our abilities now to be able to talk to each other, which can accommodate consciousness existing without a brain. But we know that there is evidence that it can do. Now, if consciousness is a field, it's subtly different. It means that the brain is then processing, like a radio processes a radio signal, is the same way that the brain effectively attunes into the consciousness field. And by doing so, we become conscious. But the consciousness is always there. But the question is it individuated when it is as a field? Or does it need something else to bring it into existence in some way or other? Now, my hypothesis, my cheating the ferryman hypothesis, I don't need to worry about whether consciousness exists after death, because my model doesn't need that. My model works within the dying brain. In other words, when you die, but before you die, you move on, while your brain is still functioning. And the issue there is time. Time is the thing that people never think about when they come up with these models. They never think about the fact that time can dilate. that time itself is a dimension. So you move within time. There is something, for instance, called orthogonal time, which is effectively time that comes off at a right angle from our time. You imagine, time running from the past to the future. Orthogonal time is a time that runs at a right angle from each millionth of a second. And each millionth of a second contains all its own time. And again, this is what happens with Coop. He's able to be outside of our flow of time, and from the fifth dimension is able to look in at the whole life of his daughter. And this is of profound importance, and a lot of people really miss it in my writings. They just don't get it. It's not it's my fault for not being able to get my ideas across in the way I mean them. But this is important. It means that when you die, your perception of time changes. So for you, for somebody observing you dying, you die, but the final microsecond of your life could be 70 years. It could be 100 years. It could be 1,000 years. But from your point of view, you continue. In other words, the person in time leaves you behind as they travel through the time flow, but you're still there at the point of your death. Because there was one very famous statement that somebody said, what is dying? Dying is running out of time. But you never run out of your own personal time. And I'll guarantee everybody that's in this room at the moment will know this. When you sleep and have dreams, you can have a whole dream in a split second. In a car crash, time dilates itself extraordinarily. And again, if anybody's interested on my angle on this, get hold of my book, The Labyrinth of Time. And I explain this in detail, exactly how this can happen. And again, I do the neurology, I do the neurochemistry, I do the physics, and I do the maths of this as to how this can be.
And also that goes on nicely into the quantum suicide bit, that you never die in your own life. You only die in other people's kind of existence. Right, we're going on to Mike Ferrito, and then I will probably butcher, unfortunately, Ollie Andrea's name, because I'm not very good on that. Mike?
Hey, Paul, thanks. And hey, Anthony, how are you?
Hi, Mike. Hi, Mike. Great to see you. I've got your mug in front of me as we speak.
Oh, great. Well, I'm kind of trying to figure out what to do with those. I have a limited run, but thank you. I appreciate sending the picture. One of the things that I wanted to mention, you covered a lot there, but and you talk about it. You talk about it with regard to Myron Dahl. Aldous Huxley talks about it as well.
I'm just going to pause you there, Mike, and just to let you know that Myron Dahl is actually listening in. We're just trying to get him into the room.
Great. I know. Yeah. Hey, Myron. Aldous Huxley talks about the cerebral reducing valve. And so in some respects, a brain may get in the way of a larger experience. You've written about this in a few places, in a few books. So while it's great to have a brain, there's then a path to augmenting the experience of that brain. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I liked what you were describing. You were describing Flatland and the way you were talking about dimensions and how I love the way Edwin Abbott talks about it, that a person who's living in two dimensions, if someone walked into that square, what they would see is just the vector of that person's foot as it crossed those two dimensions. They wouldn't see a foot. And in a similar way, there are things that we may perceive with our limited brain functioning as like a splotch or as a light or as just something that's incomplete because we don't have all the perspective and information. I probably said a lot there. I'll take a pause. What do you think about that, Anthony?
I think spot on. I mean, I think the Edwin Abbott book is required reading for anybody who wants to understand when we're talking about dimensions, what we mean. I think one of the things that really I found extraordinary about that book was the idea of a sphere that's in a higher dimension. It's very
easy to find online to read as well.
And it's a very easy read as well, because it's written for children. So it reads very, very well. And, the idea of a sphere, and if a sphere is coming through a higher dimension, it will start as a tiny spot. And then it will just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then smaller and smaller and smaller again. And that's what we'll see. But in fact, it's a sphere. And this is of profound importance. And Mike's point about the brain being an attenuator, the idea that the brain is here to take out information, not bring it in, is of particular interest to me, because there's a group of researchers I work with at the moment, and I know a number of them, and they're doing research at the University of Sussex, and some of the things they've discovered is extraordinary. For instance, people are their brains are being scanned while they're taking psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and what the neurologists were expecting to find when they scanned the brain was that when somebody took psilocybin and started to hallucinate and see things, more parts of the brain would light up, and the brain connectivity would increase to reflect the visions they are seeing. Much to their surprise, the opposite happened. What was taking place was the parts of the brain were being switched off. So in other words, the psilocybin stops the brain being able to restrict our perceptions of what reality really is. And this is extraordinary, because this is powerful evidence that we are programmed here, and our brain is programmed in order for us to exist within a sensory world that we're able to deal with. But under certain circumstances, what I call the Huxleyan spectrum, certain individuals' their brain's abilities to take out information from the wider informational field they get compromised. Now, when people take DMT and everything else, what I argue is that their doors of perception are being opened, not being closed. The brain is suddenly stopping. The brain's ability to stop us seeing things is compromised. And of course, Myron will argue this. And I'm sure if Myron comes in and joins us, Myron experiences temporal lobe epilepsy and has done ever since I think he was 4 years of age. And Myron's world is completely different, because Myron is on what I call the Huxleyan spectrum. And very quickly in my book, Opening the Doors of Perception, I discuss the science of this in great detail. But in simple terms, I argue that the vast majority of us are neurotypicals. Our brains are closed. Our doors of perception are closed. We don't perceive anything other than dreams. And some of us don't even do that. But then there are individuals like myself who are classic migraineurs, and our doors of perception are kind of slightly open. So when I have a migraine aura, I start to see things that aren't there, but they are really there. I'm starting to see them because my doors of perception or windows have been cleaned slightly. Then you get individuals who experience temporal lobe epilepsy, whose doors are far wider. And then you get individuals who experience schizophrenia, whose doors are wide open. And of course, they cannot deal with the informational overload they're getting. Now, there are two other asides to this. I also argue that people who have autism, also their doors of perception are open. I also argue that people who have Alzheimer's disease, their doors of perception are open, and they're seeing the world as it really is. They're seeing the holographic nature of the world. They're seeing the digital nature of the world. And as a final point, the earlier point we were talking about pixelation, I know of individuals who have told me many, many times, particularly using a substance called ketamine, they see the digitization of the reality around us. And this is extraordinary. It means we're breaking down the walls of perception, and we're trying to see the world as it really is, infinite. Or to use the analogy, you're a prisoner in Plato's cave, and what is happening? You've escaped the cave, and you're seeing reality as it really is.
That can also be for Alzheimer's and all the other kind of brain conditions where you get your chemistry out of alignment, where the filters will actually start processing differently to how we normally experience the universe.
No, indeed. I mean, it's different neurotransmitters are activated at that time. And indeed, this morning we were talking about DMT in the brain. And one of the great mysteries of modern neurology is the role of something called the trace-associated amine receptors sites in the brain, in the neurons. And for years, neurologists have been puzzled because they didn't know which neurotransmitter reacted with these things. They do now. It's DMT. So DMT, as Rick Strassman has argued, probably is our reality modulator. In fact, what makes the reality work the way it does and the way we perceive it and the way we does is probably endogenous DMT. We are probably continually tripping in DMT. And that's what our reality is. And what happens is the DMT becomes more powerful in its abilities to stop the attenuator, the Huxleyan attenuator. And of course, just to go back, if anybody's interested in the history of this whole attenuator argument, the first person to really come in was Henri Bergson, a French philosopher. And then a British philosopher called C.D. Broad also wrote about this extensively. The problem we have is, well, the advantage I have, I suppose, is that I consider myself, I'm interested in all subjects. Whereas academics tend to go down one channel or another. They're either a psychiatrist, a neurochemist, a psychologist, a quantum physicist, a cosmologist. Whereas as independent researchers, we're in a position we don't specialize so much. So it means we can join the dots across the points. We are not siloized like they are.
This is quite amazing because our community does the same thing. There's so many people every week who come in who are so different with their actual passions along with their own medical conditions and everything else, and we get that nice interlock. We're not just cookie cutter shape of the next person in. Mike, if you are finished with your question, I'm going to bring Ollie Andrea in, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that was great answer. I appreciate that. Thanks.
And Ollie, please tell me how you say your name properly.
Hello, and thank you for this Q&A session. My name is Ollie Andre Olar, and by the way, thank you for pushing me over the edge to finally make a Twitter account. So that's great. I'm a practicing Kabbalist, astrologer, and animist from Transylvania in Romania, and a general paranormal adventurer, experiencer. I spent a lot of time in my youth exploring ancient megalithic sites, burial mounds throughout Europe, sleeping on burial mounds to have initiations, doing them, on my own. And my question here for you, Anthony, and everyone listening is, if we are this wavelength field that we call divinity, consciousness, experiencing itself through narrowing the aperture and being this individuated consciousness, and we experience life through the natural production of dimethyltryptamine, what are your takes on places in the natural landscape that this field opens up naturally and we can experience it in an organic sense? Like, if you know paranormal lingo, the Oz effect, as I have experienced that numerous times in specific places, for example, limestones, places with underwater cave systems. I think there's natural places around us wherein we can be more aware and interact with this phenomena and the field more easily. That is my question, and thank you very much.
Ollie, thank you very much. That was a wonderful question. By the way, you may be interested to know that 3 of my books, I think, at the moment are in Romanian. So if you're interested in reading my work in Romanian, you have the opportunity to do so. Very, very interesting question, and one that has fascinated me for a long time. The Oz factor is something that's of particular interest to me. Somebody I know of, and one day I will meet her, was a huge admirer of Jenny Randall's, who was the person who first came up with the concept of the Oz factor. And also there is another writer that I've met on a couple of occasions, Paul Devereux, and Paul writes regularly about these issues and the terms of kind of portal places, for want of a better term. And I've always been intrigued by this as to...
Hopefully we haven't just lost Anthony. I'm just going to ask Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Has Anthony disappeared to you?
Yeah, he has now, yes.
Yeah, we'll wait for him to come back. Otherwise, we'll just talk amongst ourselves. I was also going to say to you, Ollie, the fact that you talk about limestone, another one would be quartz, which also affects the brain in such a way to give experiences. And of course, at some stage, we must always have to talk about Tesla and his work and thinking of the water under the pyramids and the way that they generated energy as well. So that would be a fascinating area at some point. I don't know if you realize, but I'm just filling time. In the bio, you will also see in the shared section here where we've got our links for different events that are coming up. So, for example, as I mentioned before, Imaginal Traveller will be doing a talk on the 13th. I don't know if, Anthony, at some point when you can actually talk, let me know. I'm just going to let Imaginal Traveller do a quick, brief promo for herself.
Well, good morning from the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to be talking about a life of transformation, a life of changing consciousness. Kundalini is just one part of it. I talk about the arc of evolution of contact, and my direct experience of what is actually going on with the changing of our consciousness. And I have excited to be here with Anthony, and I do have questions for him when he does return.
He's run away. He knew that you were coming with a question.
I know. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to
Thursday's going to be good.
Joining.
God, there's going to be regular people in. They're going to be having conversation. Someone's bringing cake, I'm sure.
Oh, awesome. I'll definitely be there then.
Anthony's accepted my invitation. Hopefully he'll be bounced back into the right order. Okay. It's always nice when the wheels of the bus just fall off. It's good. Mike, how are you doing?
Yeah. Just one thing I wanted to add to that. There was a lot of talk of mathematics and whether the universe is bound or infinite, and I think it was mentioned that it is cyclical.
By the way, guys, I'm back. Just to let you know.
Hey there, Anthony. I was just mentioning when I was filling a little bit of time there.
It's all right. Please continue.
Yeah. And you read about this in the Mescalito book, Anthony, that one thing I talked about with Peter, that the idea that it's not mathematical, but it's sort of common sense. Days are cyclical. When does the day begin? Maybe someone has a perspective. Maybe it begins when the sun comes up. Maybe it begins when the moon, comes up. But days are cyclical. Years are cyclical. Rotations of planets around stars, rotations of galaxies. So these aren't mathematical ideas. They're just practical things we see in the world that seem to confirm. Maybe they're counterintuitive, but they confirm this notion of the cyclical nature of phenomena.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Mike, if I can just finish off my comments about liminal places, and then we can continue, because I was out there, so I don't know what you guys were discussing. But just to finish off the idea that there does seem to be these places where whatever we can call it seems to be thinner, that we can attune with the other, as it were, which I call the egregorial. And in my book, The Hidden Universe, I argue that there are places where people or beings seem to be able to come through from somewhere else, either tuning in with our own subconscious or breaking
through. This will fit exactly well, because Imaginal had her hand up before Williams, and obviously she is a person who gets information in a very interesting way.
Okay, because we'll touch on to that. But just to finish, though, I think that there is a direct link here with running water. Seems to be very much a theme, and also the comment about limestone. Now, of course, we know that in many years ago, there was the stone theory of hauntings, and the idea that in some circumstances the environment can record events that take place, particularly events that are traumatic in one way or another. And again, I'm reminded here of the work of an associate of mine called Paul Eno, who is a researcher into hauntings in Rhode Island in the States. And Paul I cite Paul's work in a couple of my books, and it's quite extraordinary. Some of the things that he has witnessed, whereby it seems that there are time slips taking place, where you can see other people who cannot see you, and clearly it's some form of recording, or it's some form of window into an alternate reality. And again, coming down, to the discussion about dimensions of space-time, could it be that what is taking place here is that these things are opening up in some way, and opening up portals of perception? And these are areas, again, I'm very, very keen.
I think someone's just booted Anthony out. I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
Lost
him.
Always the way when we do this, which is good. So, Imaginal, we got you lined up, ready to come in with the next question when he gets back, which is good. And I have to say, it's really nice of everyone taking their time out of their day to come and talk to us and listen to what's going on. It's got very crowded in here, but lucky enough, there's enough room for us. Are you back yet, Anthony? No, he's not. Would you like to plug your latest book, by the way, Mike, while you're here?
It's not, thank you for that. It's not out yet, but it is called...
Plug anything then. Plug.
No, I'll plug it anyway. It's Mescalito riding his white horse, and it's based on interviews with Peter Rowan, who is a bluegrass musician, but plays more than bluegrass. It's in production right now, and I expect it out in a few months. But it's very much a kind of exploration of the perennial philosophy. We start with music, but we go way off into inner and outer space. And if you don't know his music, peter-rowan.com, and he has there's a lot of spirituality in his music, which includes gospel music, bluegrass, but Buddhist influences. Highly recommend you check his music out, and then you'll may appreciate the book a little more. But thanks for that, Paul.
That's okay. The whole thing here is that we are a drop, but we can become an ocean by getting together and learning together, and just obviously making friends along the way. And that's the way it should be. I think Anthony's just run off. He's just done a runner.
And by the way, if you go to MikeFiorito.com, you can see more about the book.
Because that's all one word, isn't it?
Yes, it's all one word.
Keeps everyone in line with bits and pieces, which is great. I'm trying to look to see if there's any signs of life from Anthony at the moment, but he's not saying anything. Williams, is your hand up for the next question after Imaginal?
Yeah, it's about
That's
time
good.
and stuff, yeah. So,
Meanwhile, we're chatting amongst ourselves. It's always worthwhile. So what we've also been finding out is that the community has been growing because more people have been telling others about the way that we contemplate things, go over videos, go over books, and it's just really working well. And you'll probably hear good comments. I don't know if Greybeard wants to talk or not. Are you capable for talking, Greybeard? Soon find out. Peace symbol if you can't talk at the moment. But as you said, Krista's going to be doing a good old talk on lucid dreaming on the 8th of February, which she's been into with meditation, yoga, and other books and other people that she's got connections to, which is great. And I will give you the opportunity to quickly give yourself a plug now, because I'm still waiting for Anthony. I'm going to type some questions to him to see what's happening with him. Are you there, Krista? No, you disappeared off the invite list. You can't talk. Okay, that's fine. I'll do the plugging as we go along. So here we go. And of course, if you ever want some good content, look at Wild Eye's Twitter account. That's always good. And I'm just trying to see if there's messages coming in from Anthony. Dun, dun, dun. So far, nothing. I wonder if he's had a power supply cut out, which would be always interesting. So, Imaginal, how are things going while I am just spinning wheels and trying to figure things out?
I feel for you. Yeah, it's good to be flexible on these platforms. Can I just share about the podcast?
Do. I would say plug.
I'm plugging. Shamelessly plugging.
If you plug too much, I will get rid of you, but it's okay.
It's called Translating Infinity, and I am attempting to speak from the subjective perspective about a life of transformation. And I've already written a book, but I found that through these changes, they're so multidimensional and so difficult to squeeze into the linear printed word or even spoken word, that I am just going to take my life of music and learning about attunement and the field and what I was taught by learning the language of the field. And the best way I can do that is through a podcast format. So that's called Translating Infinity. And it's about the contact, the catalyst to source.
I have to say, I've listened to the first episode. It's really easy to listen to, very engaging, and you will want to listen to more.
Thank you. I'm working on episode 2 now. It's taken a little bit more time than the first one, but I'm loving it. I'm excited about it, and also we'll bring in other people who are connecting and having these changes in their consciousness as well. So thank you for letting me plug.
That's okay. It's not a problem. Are you there, Anthony? This is good fun. I'm going to remove him. And then, no, if I move him, I'll move him from co-host, then see if he can bounce back in again. Meanwhile, pressing these buttons, right, there we go. Approved to Anthony. Now he should come back to normal. Oh, I saw a speaker option. That's good. Now, can you talk to me? Hello, Anthony. He's got all the right icons. He's got all the right little red bits now. Hopefully no one's taking him hostage in his room and just gagged him. Are you okay?
Right. You got my bag?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, just everything went dead. It literally... No cut, no anything. My Wi-Fi, I don't know what happened. It just went like what I was saying.
It's okay. We had nothing to say. We were just sitting there very quietly.
I could hear you all the time. I was continually hearing you. I could hear everything you were talking about.
Imaginal has got questions, obviously, for yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, Anthony. It's wonderful always to be in discussion with you. So thanks for taking the time to do this with us.
Thank you.
I am more interested, more passionate because of my life and the experiences. I'm more passionate about talking about the subjective view. I find all of the studies and the dot connecting and the external reality very interesting. But through my podcast and through my book, my first book from a few years back, I was attempting to shift the conversation to the subjective, as much as that is judged in our culture. And it's been a tough life. It's been a tough road. But it's the question I have. First of all, I'm very curious about your subjective viewpoint, your experiences, what's happening to you. And this is really what I love to do with others, is when I find others like myself who have been shoved inward for one reason or another, we have to adapt to connectivity with, quote, other consciousness, other beings. And my working theory at this point is that contact occurs in this way, as ambassadors saying, wake the F up. It's time to wake up. We had an agreement.
I'm glad that you're using very soft language. I was going to have to put you into the sin bin if you were going to start going a bit heavy.
Oh, silly. So I really am interested in how we navigate now. I'm using dreams to navigate. I'm using the downloads. I am absolutely guided right now, and I want to connect with others who are actively practicing with their new tools that have been unearthed, their new gifts. Are you in conversation with others like this? And I don't know if you're comfortable speaking from your own personal life, but I find that's what I'm far more interested in, because once we shove ourselves into and connect to the field again, it's like you get your information there and you don't need it so articulated and dot oriented. It's like once we're all here reconnected to the field, we just instantaneously know and are connected, right? So is this sounding distant from what you study and what you are interested in?
Well, I suppose my starting point is always science, and always logic. And I have to say that my experiences, I don't tend to I feel that I am guided by my daemon. And I believe that my daemon guides me. But my work very much explains why my daemon does what it does, or what she does, because we've been discussing this in great detail in other groups as to the contrast in sexuality between the daemon and the eidolon. And my daemon knows what I need to do because she has lived my life before, and will know the avenues we've pursued collectively as a unitary being for many, many times. And therefore it, she, he, whatever we want to call it, will warn me about things. Now, again, Myron Dial will know very, very much about this, because I argue that individuals who experience temporal lobe epilepsy, the daemon is able to communicate far more effectively with them than with neurotypicals. And Myron's daemon, for instance, is called Charon. And indeed, it was Charon that first contacted me on the behalf of Myron many, many years ago. And I feel that this is what people interpret as being the guiding spirit. I have many friends who are mediums, and I would argue that the spirit guides that they communicate with are probably their daemon in disguise, because the daemon can communicate in many, many different ways. But there's nothing within my worldview that suggests that the daemon is precognitive or anything like that. The daemon simply knows these things because it's lived it before. For the daemon, these are memories. So the daemon knows what's going to happen to you next, not because it's precognitive, but purely and simply because it's lived it before. And if it then changes your life pattern to accommodate, say, for instance, the daemon manages to communicate with you to stop you going somewhere where you're killed, from then onwards, your daemon is also unaware of what's going to happen next, because it's opened up collapsed effectively a new version of the universe to accommodate that survival. And in which case your daemon doesn't know any more than you do. Now, in terms of guidance from other areas, this is where I start touching upon my ongoing egregorial hypothesis. And my research seems to suggest that there are other entities out there that are not necessarily part of the daemon eidolon dyad and are not necessarily human. And in my last book, The Hidden Universe and Non-Human Entities, I argue that in some way these elemental beings can manipulate us in some way and play with us. And I've got many, many cases of individuals who have been effectively lied to by things that they believed were their spirit guides, things that they believed were guiding them, or people from their past or whatever. And self-evidently, they're just playing a game. And there seems to be this game going on, which I don't...
And someone's booted Anthony out. Obviously, you shouldn't be talking about that particular subject. Obviously, we're going to be slowly getting close to time at 5 o'clock. So if anyone's got questions, put their hands up or ask to speak so that we can get them in line.
May I just respond to what Anthony
Oh, yeah, sure.
saying?
You can fill the space, yeah.
yeah, this is always the challenge. I feel when we have just moments, together to discuss these things. It isn't about. I would call it a daemon if we could. I would name it or label it a daemon with all this data and information flowing in and guiding in order to have a deeper conversation. But I'm finding that the labels and the definitions, once you're immersed in this,
I was going to say that with it, you might not even know that you're being guided. I mean, only when we look backwards on certain events. I mean,
yes.
As we discussed through my life, it looks like I've been pushed into locations. It's not me running towards it. It's other things pushing me there, which is fascinating because you don't see someone or an entity. It's just a set of circumstances that basically building you, toughening you up, and giving you your skill sets that you require for later on. And it's a kind of strange one.
Yeah, we're being evolved when we engage with it. When we don't ignore it, right? Is kind of what I learned over my lifetime. So I think if tricky spirits were trying to mess with me in my life, I mean, it's been my entire life, and it has all been. There's certainly a lot of fear when I distanced myself from it and tried to return to it. But it's all benevolent. It's growing us, I feel, to remember who we are and reconnect with Source, right?
Oh,
I mean, it's all about that core divinity within us. It's like, this is what I've been pointed to my whole life. This is within you. This is within you. This is within you.
The good thing is that we come from kind of a relative. Hooray!
Yeah, obviously.
You're allowed to talk about the topics.
Yeah, unfortunately, the archons.
Hello, can I just say one thing? I'm having a problem. I know you all can hear me.
Yeah.
Paul, I just wanted you to know my emojis. I mean, I couldn't say anything or do anything. So at this point, I'm okay. But if there's, anything I have to say, I can't put a hand up or anything. I just wanted you to know that.
I'll let you come off and say things.
I'm okay now. I mean, I'm just saying. I wanted to.
You're polite enough. I know what you're going to do. You won't just decide to hog the whole space.
No. I just wanted to put up 100 on what Imaginal was saying. That's all. So, that's why I dropped down to listener. I couldn't do anything. Anthony,
that's fine.
I don't know. I got hijacked.
Oh, dear. Well, we definitely, the archons really don't like what we're doing sometimes. And it does seem that this happens far too often. And it's a running joke with people who interview on their own podcasts because we just wait for it to go down. And it is quite extraordinary. And it's normally when I start talking about such topics that suddenly the plug gets pulled because there's absolutely
100%. Yes.
Well, there's absolutely no reason. Literally, I am right on top of I have, a BT system here. It's top of the range. It's expensive and everything else. And I'm literally no more than 2 feet away from the server, the Wi-Fi router. And I'm still losing my signal, which is just unbelievable. It is incredible. It hasn't gone down. The blue light is still on, but I just completely lose it. I just don't
give it ideas.
No, absolutely. But going back to this whole interesting idea. Yeah, I'm really intrigued in the sense of the information you're getting. The information you get, are you in a position to say whether the information you get you can independently prove is coming from somewhere else?
I would say it's coming from within. It's coming from a reconnection to the field.
Okay, but the information you get, can you objectively prove that it is useful information that...
Absolutely.
Okay, and stuff that you could not possibly know?
It's about our growth and evolution at this time, that this is... the messages have been coming first in writing, back in the 90s. Once I had the Kundalini full event, there were many Kundalini events, then I was changed. And I then became a translator, where I could actually translate in real time. It's just pure energy. It's frequency. I'm also a musician. So I wrote a ton of songs after the Kundalini event. And it's not something that I wasn't thinking anymore. It was all just happening. And I had to adapt to that way of being. I'm still adapting to that way of being. So I'm translating the messages that we are coming to a time, and there's a window of time. And I've also walked the sacred Mayan fire path and initiated in Tikal back in 2002 and studied the Mayan science. And this all just kind of comes together for this portal or this window that we're in to recognize and to remember who we are. And so all of the information was about, pretty much like it's sitting in December 2019, January 2020. I was translating messages that were very pressing. Okay, it's important. It's not saying there's a virus coming. It's saying it's crucial that you go within and that you tether to this divine, that you know who you are, because it's going to get very, very, very confusing. I even translated the disinformation, all of the stuff that distracts us. It's like it's guiding us into ourselves again. Otherwise, we fall back into the cycles, the 26,000 year cycle, again, of dark and light, which is the symbol you see on my profile.
The other thing to go with Imaginal, because Imaginal and Wild Eyes are very similar, Wild Eyes has actually had information that she could never have got, and then she had to go off and research it to prove it to herself. So
exactly.
Imaginal and Wild Eyes are basically doing what you're asking, Anthony, that they're getting things that they shouldn't have, but because they are skeptical of the information, they then go off and research it.
I've always been backwards that way. I don't know about you, Wild Eyes, but I've always been upside down in this world. I mean,
yeah. We're like sisters from different mothers kind of thing in that respect.
Right. But it's like we've had to orient to finding the data. Like, oh, is that what you call that? You have a direct experience, and then you go, oh, they call it the daemon. Oh, they call it this. They call it that. So it's a reversal, and then. Well, I feel for you, sister. You must have had a rough life too. But things are getting so much better now.
The cleansing is coming, correct?
Well, yeah, we're in it. And I know this might make Anthony uncomfortable because it's not science-based, and I totally respect science and logic. But there's a whole other... I'm just trying to give voice to the people who are in it and trying to navigate these huge changes, bioenergetic changes in my case. And I also took DMT-5-MeO, and the Kundalini event was far more productive than the DMT, I have to say, just as a side note. So I will...
just going to check to see if Anthony can actually hear us. He's been very quiet. Whether I have to knock him out again, then bring him back again. Knock 3 times if you can hear us, Anthony. Williams, we are coming to you with your question. I'm going to have to knock him down to listener and then see if we bring him back again. I think he's having issues. Nice to see you, ad hominem. Haven't seen you for a while. Right, here goes the invite. How many times do you have to kick a guest out to make them talk? It's very interesting. Right. I see you lurking down there, Anthony. Right, I gave you the invite. Right, invite to speak. There you go. And there you are.
Hello, am I back?
You're back now.
Okay, yeah, because what happens is I get bombed off, and then I can hear you all, and then I have to request the mic, and I keep requesting it, and nothing happens.
And Actually, I don't see those requests. It's normally when my own judgment to knock you out and then bring you back again seems to be working at the moment.
Okay, I think that's.
I've seen the
Wild eyes
request.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah, and I pressed approve. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Ah, you're getting to them before me then, because I made you a co-host, and that's probably what's happening. Yeah, gotcha.
I'm sorry. You can have that title back.
No, I am a host. You are the co-host.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very frustrating because I'm sort of sitting here very interested in the things you're saying here. I suppose from my point of view, for instance, as a historian and as a historian of religious belief systems, I know perfectly well that every single generation gets messages from somewhere saying these are the end times, that this is the things we need to do to change ourselves. And they weren't the end times. And the amount of times that religious groups turn around and say that the end is coming, and it never does. So for me, these messages are confusing. What I'm interested in is getting, if these messages are coming from people who are trying to help us, why don't they give us something that is actually useful? Have I been lost again?
No.
Okay. It's why
we're
they
just
don't
wondering
give us,
if you wanted a response from that
why
point.
don't they
Wild
give
eyes and
us
imagine can do
anything
that.
of any use? How many channeled messages do we get? How many from, there's so many channelers out there. And I've heard nothing from any channeler that's of any use whatsoever other than New Age platitudes and we all need to love each other and all this business. It would be much better if we got something useful from them. I'm not being difficult here.
I can respond.
Okay.
No, I understand. I can respond to that. What I find is that, I received tons of useful things that I began to apply in my life. It helped me connect more quickly and directly. It helped me to cleanse or purify the shadow inside. It helped me to understand that our emotional nature and that there's an entire system within us that's suppressed, and it's the feminine. It's the feminine inner technology that we're not even using, that we're not even aware of. So we don't know what we don't know, right? So when you tell people about it, the eyes glaze or they get triggered, or it's like there's a deep, deep wound inside every one of us, a wound of separation. And we've learned to defend against that. We have these fortresses built up. So when these things are said or translated, sure, they sound New Age platitude. I'll give you that. But what other words? When scientists won't listen to us, and I'm not speaking directly to you, Anthony, I'm saying this is from my life experience, that we can't, that there's this great divide that we could, if we were to find common language. And
well, I suppose, can I use the example here of what happened in 2012? There was supposed to be this huge change in December 2012, massive change. It was all going to change everything, and nothing happened.
Were you listening to Hollywood movies, or were you listening to the elders?
Happened? My life didn't change. Well, nobody I know's life changed in December 2012. Nothing changed. I think
there's a whole hell of a lot of change going on.
In fact, things got a lot worse. They didn't get better. It didn't happen. 2012 didn't happen. Just like the end of the world that was predicted by the millenarian groups in the great period in the 1850s, nothing happened. Nothing happened. And scientists look at this and say, here we go again. They're all off saying the world's going to end, and it doesn't happen.
I've never translated that the world would end, and the Mayans
But nothing happened. Nothing happened at all. It isn't. The world is far worse now than it was in 2012, but it was supposed to get better, according to the Mayan tradition. Where's it happening?
In consciousness. It's happening in consciousness.
Whose consciousness?
This is the point that we get to where it's like, I don't know how to explain what's happening because I'm not looking at your dots. I don't know your dots. I don't know your language. And I don't have time, frankly, to go back to school and become a scientist. So I have the language.
But the issue is here, if there is evidence People make claims, and I know this because I was heavily involved in watching the whole 2012 debacle take place live on Facebook, with people posting, oh, this is going to happen, or it's going to be wonderful, it's going to do this, that. And as usual, nothing happened. And there's a term called cognitive dissonance. And I know this is as a study of sociology of religion and the sociology of beliefs. What happens is you have cognitive dissonance, and everyone runs off and tries to come up with excuses as to why it didn't happen. You know?
I agree with you. I wasn't one of those people.
But there were those people. And this is the thing that discredits serious research into this stuff. You know, that I'm trying to do the science. I'm trying to engage with scientists. I'm trying to really understand what's going on here. And I get this kind of new age, wishy-washy word soup from people. And it genuinely annoys me, because
I understand.
All that happens is the general public look at this and say they're all loonies.
Yeah, I respect your work very much. And I have looked to you to be the bridge in many ways. And
I believe I want to be the bridge, and I do. But guys, we've got to start speaking their language. We've got to start engaging directly and proving our positions. When I debate with scientists, I get invited regularly by skeptic groups, and they invite me, and without exception, they always back down in the end, because they think they're going to be having a bit of fun. And when they realize that probably, and I know as much of the science as they do, they run away. And I'm on your side on this. I believe that that science has to change. We have to change the worldview, because the world is going down the pan. We have
just
divisiveness.
Because obviously we don't want this to be a heated kind of environment.
Oh, not at all. It's not getting that, really, genuinely.
I know, but with this, Wild Eyes can tell you actual information that she got, and she had to go off and research to make sure it was correct before she used that information.
Okay.
Can't you? Because you've told me the story.
Here's the bottom line, Anthony. Even if we're given information, it's not always complete, because it's really not our job to know certain things. So, and you have to also consider the source in a lot of things. I'm sure there were plenty of people that had abilities that would or could not say anything because it wasn't our place to say it. And I'm with you, and I respect your work 100%. But you see the bind that it puts you in also, because you're all about the science. In the paranormal world, when I do an investigation, I'm all about the science too. You have to prove to me that what just happened wasn't, the wind, as opposed to some energy moving it. Okay. So I'm with you. I understand. But it's just like imaginal set. There's a thing about the dark and the light, and when you talk about the daemons, those are the ones that actually sometimes will incite a certain amount of fighting, not necessarily titling it what it should be, and it incites people to the point where somebody just comes along and says, well, this is what's really happening, and they're really one sandwich short of a picnic. And people will tend to believe it, because what else could it be? And it makes sense, and it's fantastical. There are things that I've been told, and I may be given names, and at the same time, that's all they're going to tell me. So I'm not in the position. I'm just going to tell you, in September of 2019, I was a physical and mental mess, because I knew that there was already a struggle between the dark and the light, and something was coming. Was I told what? No.
Why not? Why not? Why didn't they just tell you what was coming?
Because it wasn't my business.
Surely, if they're trying to help us, they should give information.
Okay.
Surely.
Okay.
Then that would prove it, wouldn't it? If you were able to stand up and say, this specifically is going to happen on this day, and the voices or whatever has told me, the world would believe you.
Okay.
Wouldn't they? The world would stand up and believe you.
Let me ask you this. They give me the information. Who am I supposed to call? Who am I supposed to tell?
You make a record of it. You make a record of it. You actually phone up radio stations and you say, on the 21st of September, this is going to happen. Okay. And then it will be registered and everybody will remember what you said. Tell as many people as you possibly can. And then when it happens, there will be witnesses. It's simple.
I don't know about imaginal, but do you know how many times I have said things to people and they laugh at me? And the only thing I can say is, okay.
So the people you've said things to people and they've laughed at you and then they've subsequently come true. Did they still laugh after you afterwards?
Well, they're not around. Okay. They're not going to say anything.
But surely.
No, you're right. There's not enough. It's just like we see what is going on. We are not in control to make a change. How many times have you thought about, well, why isn't that happening? Well, because, and if somebody would come out and say, because this is the real reason, this is the real scientific reason, they don't do that. And you got to think about, well, what is standing in that way? And in my case, I have a certain force that stands in my way. It's just like what's happening today. Believe it or not, in my estimation, that a certain part of this is based on energy, and there are forces that will work against. And if it's something that you're not supposed to learn or it's supposed to say or whatever, things happen. It's questionable. And if you're able to get to that.
Sorry, Wild Eyes. What I was going to do is.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
All I ever want is proof. That's all I want. The amount of times that people have come to me and said, "Oh, I'm psychic, and I made this prediction and it came true," and then I challenge these people and say, "Can you give me the information?" Oh, suddenly it's not there, or suddenly the records aren't there, and suddenly it evaporates time and time and time again.
With the thing that they're saying, though, Anthony, they're not running around trying to put out posters saying what's going to happen next. Are you, Wild Eyes?
No, I couldn't prove it to any great extent. It is subjective. However, when the events start to happen, then it's making its truth.
Because you're not looking for publicity in any manner. So
just quickly, you were told about what COVID? What were you told about?
I sensed that there was something major coming. I was not told.
There was something major coming.
Yeah,
and that was it.
I mean, it was happening. There's a fight. I mean, this is where it gets subjective. Okay. There's a fight between the dark and the light. Imaginal even brought that up. That's basically where, what certain things happen with her. Okay. It's the same thing. There is a sense of what's going on other realms, but I don't know a lot about it myself. I'll be very honest. And it's not the kind of thing where I can do an experiment to find the answer like you can. This is something entirely different. I have to rely on something, someone, many, okay, in order to tell me. Sometimes if I need a treatment for something, I'm told, I'm given the information. And once in a while, I'll validate it.
I use the analogy. I'm kind of with you guys, right? But I'm the person doing the battle with the scientists. I need information. I need proof rather than there's a battle between light and dark. That doesn't help me. If I'm engaging with scientists trying to prove that there's something really going on, I can't just say that. I've got to be able to actually prove it because that's how science works. And I know that I know that people like yourself have extraordinary experiences. And I know of a lot of people have had extraordinary experiences. Some of them are unbelievable, but I know that they're true. But I need more information. I sometimes feel I'm on this bridge and there's the scientists that hate me and are lobbing stones at me. Then there are the New Agers, Anthony. And there's the New Agers, the other side, lobbing stones at me. And I'm going, why don't you all wake up and realize that you're speaking completely different languages and you have different levels of what you consider to be proof?
What you could be seeing here, Anthony, is you've probably got two good people that can be worthwhile contributors to information for you because of their skill set. They will be able to now be part of the collective, give you information and put it to one side and see what comes out of it. You know, what
That's
the strong
what we
feelings
have to
are.
do. That's what we have to do. When we get predictions, when we get inklings, when we get ideas, we need to write them down. We need to record them. So I can turn around and say, like a friend of mine who sent a message to British Airways, and he sent a fax saying that Concorde was going to, a Kai Concorde was going to crash in France, and there will be German people on board. That happened. That was absolute proof. Okay, beyond any doubt. Okay. And I know that was the fact because I'd seen the date stamp. Another
now,
friend
we've got
of
a
mine.
few questions here that are going to, because I know your time's going to be short soon, and I don't want to obviously shortchange people who've got their hands up for a long time. Because we've got Williams there, and we've got Brave New World, Mike Frito, and Avogadis. So, when you're ready.
It's just more of a thought that occurred to me on how to explain this and how to comprehend it for myself with all this discussion about things. Thinking that the universe is a consciousness and we are the receivers for that consciousness. Maybe the universe bestows upon us eternal life in terms of time. Meaning when we die as a person, we get trapped in this time. And the way I see time is like, think of a bunch of metal little balls in a paper sheet, but just scattered all through the universe. And our consciousness gets trapped in that time. And so therefore we can see what has happened, what is to happen, and what is. And so we could manipulate, and that's where you get spirits and stuff. And so when you get these people talking to you, or you get voices in your head, these are the people that are in this stagnant of time, that they can travel anywhere in time and they can see it happen. And this is where people get premonitions and stuff like that. It's just a thought that I've had. I don't know why, but.
Yeah, again, it's an interesting idea. The idea that if you, again, it's the concept of orthogonal time, and it's the concept that there's a time at right angles to this time. And that when you're in that time, all of our time is concurrent with them. So therefore you can see the past and the future. My issue always is, though, that I always find it extraordinary that people who make precognitions and make statements, what they tend to do is scattergram. They tend to make lots and lots of predictions, and people forget the predictions they got completely and utterly wrong and remember the things they got right. Now, to me, it's a simple statement. Either you can see the future or you can't. And if you're seeing things and stating this is going to happen and then it doesn't happen, the only counter argument could be is that that event didn't take place because it was already in potentiality, which is a reasonable point. But I know of people who have seen the future and are 100% right, like a friend of mine, Graham Nichols, who saw a bomb attack in London on a specific date at a specific location, a specific pub. And 5 days later, it happened. And he had 6 witnesses to that. That, to me, is proof that people can see the future. But turning around and saying that, I feel that a person with an S in their name is going to have a major influence on your life. Yeah, really. So we need to just be very, very careful about this in terms of what we consider to be proof and not. Precognition does happen. There's no question. I've seen it happen. I know it happens, but people can't control it. It's not as if people can control it in the same way. I'm going to have to shoot now, guys, because I'm about to finish. If that's okay, by all means.
Just one line from each, because obviously Brave New Order had his hands up. If he's just got one quick thing, if it's brief.
Yes, and Anthony, I became familiar with your work thanks to Perceptions, but I just wanted to say I really resonated with what you said, and absolutely no disrespect to anyone, but as a former Christian myself, again, nothing but respect for the faith. It's just not my personal belief system anymore. There's always this prediction that the Antichrist was coming at any moment, and I used to think, well, during the Red Terror Brigades, you could make an argument for that as well. You could make an argument for that as well in World War II. You could make an argument for a lot of these world-changing events, thinking that the Antichrist was just around the corner and it was going to be a mass extinction event. So I really resonate with what you say, and thank you.
Well, I think as a final point on that, I mean, if you read the Bible, it turns around and it says, that that what was it now that there is people alive now that will see Christ returning, and clearly that wasn't correct. Making predictions is always a dangerous game. And I know from my own analysis of history, and said particularly millenarian movements that were around and have been throughout history. After the 30 Years' War, there was massive amounts of people that said the world would end. And the one consistent thing is they're all wrong. And to me, that has to be proof. There are people, that there were people who, for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses. How many times have the Jehovah's Witnesses said the world was going to end? And they've stopped doing it now. They've stopped doing it because they kept getting it wrong. So it's a very dangerous track to get on in terms of this. I think most religious groups realize that getting in the prediction business isn't the best idea, because we know that every couple of months there'll be some religious group who will come up and say the world will end, and they all climb into the trees and wait for revelation to come and wait for the rapture, and it never happens.
Right, just quickly go through these people so we can make sure they've had the opportunity to talk to you. Abagades, you got a brief one?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Anthony, like everything he said. And at the same time, I do agree a lot with what Imaginal said too. Like in my spaces, the Starseed Showdown, we deal with all kinds of people, and we've had very scientific people on one side and then the most woo-woo kind of people on the other. And I think that we just need to try and bridge this gap between us and improve communication, because, the scientific people need to use their intuition more, and then woo-woo people need to understand science more. So they try and bridge this gap between us and improve communication.
Abagades, your audio is going out very badly. Abagades, your audio is...
No, I think there's some feedback. There's some... Can you...
Hello, can you still hear me?
Mute Anthony for a second, the mic?
I can hear you, Anthony. Yeah, Abagades has now come back to being able to be here.
So yeah, and that's the whole reason why I made the spaces, because the 100th monkey effect, and I believe that all our consciousness is connected. So hopefully, by learning and understanding this information, it'll connect to the collective as a whole. So go ahead.
Thank you for doing that. I know you got Mike. I don't know if he's going to be quick, and then just imagine on that would be it then.
Real quick for me, Jacques Vallée said that what is needed is a paradigm change, and the next big ideas may not come from science. Just there's something out there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. I think that the great big ideas don't necessarily have to come from science. That is so important.
Someone's reversing now. That's it.
Oh, something's on fire.
Yeah, Imaginal.
Thank you, Anthony. I just want to reiterate to you that I deeply respect your work and I love your passion.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And I'm right here with you. I just want to say, though, that I don't relate to a lot of what you were describing about psychics and precognition, and even that's foreign to me. I don't frame, my experiences in that new age way. I try, not to. So I just want to say that I do know that there is a meeting ground here. There is a way that we can begin to have these conversations that I feel will propel us into what we're imagining is possible, from both sides. So thank you for your work.
And thank you for what you do as well. I mean, never ever assume that because, I will engage with people, it doesn't mean I necessarily disagree. It's just I get frustrated because I need the evidence. And as soon as I have the evidence, I can take it forward, because I believe that we are in dangerous times and we do have to work together on this.
Absolutely.
And a lot of my friends who are mediums and everything else, I respect completely and utterly. You have clearly had extraordinary experiences. And as I've argued many, many times, people come to the conclusions on what reality is from what their perceptions tell them. You are convinced about your things because this is what your experiences have told you. You know, you're not being irrational, you're not being strange, you're not being weird. This is what your input, what the world is telling you is the world is about. And I think this is where I come down with my egregorial hypothesis. I think that in each of our worlds, it's right, because we're all existing within a kind of vaguely personalized world that's based upon our own anticipations. And if you anticipate and believe things will happen, they do. I think that's how it works.
Yeah, bingo.
I genuinely do.
Just like to say that, again, you might be able to do this if you want to do another one, Anthony, at another time. But Cosmic Librarian was asking, could you at some point talk about remote viewing and premonition? Again, that could be in the next one that we do, but it's just on the table.
Yeah, I have very strong opinions on remote viewing. So yes, having written a book on the outer body experience and having a whole section on remote viewing, and I found that remote viewing is one of these things, again, that when you start actually asking the questions directly, the whole thing evaporates very, very quickly. So yes, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Excellent, because also she's now included about Psi. Unfortunately, Cosmic Librarian can't use, well, she doesn't have a smartphone to give access to these rooms, so she's doing it that way, asking questions, so that's good. And thank you very much for your time and for everybody else coming to listen, because I know that you want to close this down at this present time.
Yeah, thank you everybody again for coming in. You know, I think healthy debate is what it's all about. And this is what my groups do, you know, when we meet together, we debate and discuss these things very precisely and very strongly, and we hold our positions or we change our position if other people's viewpoints and they put their arguments forward. And I think that's the way I've always worked, and that's the way I will continue to work. And thank you again, everybody, for being involved in this. And again, Paul, thank you so much for facilitating this. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all of you spending a couple of hours with me. It's been really exciting, really interesting, and really fascinating. Thank you.
That's not a problem. And I think you said you wanted to do another one at some point. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'd do a whole series of these. I love them.
So if you're new to the Action Environment, please follow the account and also follow Anthony's account and anybody else that you feel is worthwhile within the room. As I say before, Imaginal is worthwhile following. Mike Frito, the author, Wild Eyes. Ad Hominem's got a lot of information. Brave New World Order is also a good one to follow. And Tamara. Long time no see. And she is very worthwhile. And Natural Born Alchemist, that's interesting. He's in, that's good. So, yes, it's all nice to see you again. And did Anthony disappear then? He's still there.